Hello, everybody.
Derek, are you streaming it through the Mantle page or the
It'll be
core
set up for
page?
streaming soon. Hello, everyone. My name's Derek Simrod, Director of Campaign for Munsu. As soon as Carrie Carroll gets on, who is the Facebook attaché for the Mon Climate Action Coalition, they'll be able to start streaming. And then as soon as we have everyone from the Eventbrite page and most people signed up by email, we should be able to get started proper.
Thank you, Derek.
Sorry for the wait. Okay, so I'm setting Carrie as host now. And this is Simon Hoffman, everyone. Say hello.
Hello.
Carrie, you have been hosted. So Simon, what is the Mon Climate Action Coalition? What have you been doing this last year? What are we doing now?
The Mon Climate Action Coalition. The Memorial University Climate Action Coalition is a group of students, faculty, and staff. We're a collection that are aiming to transform our university and communities into a truly sustainable place. We started last September, and we have just kind of been working towards getting the administration to sign on some things, which would be the Mon Crisis Pledge, for them to start taking actions. Now, part of the coalition is we are getting together, find ways we can educate and engage the community, and a part of that includes these webinar series.
Glad to hear it.
I suppose we're ready to get started.
It is 7 o'clock, but we need confirmation from Carrie. We do seem to be live on Facebook. Perfect. Cool. At your leisure.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Simon Hoffman, spokesperson for the Memorial University Climate Action Coalition. First, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which we gather as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq Beothuk. We'd also like to recognize the Inuit of NunatuKavut and NunatuKavut and the Inuit of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honor this beautiful land together. Thank you for joining us once again. This webinar is part of the Planting Seeds Climate Justice webinar series in partnership with the Social Justice Cooperative. The Social Justice Cooperative is a members-owned cooperative that advocates for social and environmental justice and a community partner with the Memorial University Climate Action Coalition. And the Memorial University Climate Action Coalition is a collection of students, faculty, staff, aiming to transform our institutions and community into a truly sustainable place. A part of this is to engage and educate the university body and community into the issues surrounding climate change. Tonight, we will begin a webinar series called The Impact of Climate Change on Newfoundland and Labrador Coasts. I would like to give a big thanks to Melanie, Irvine of the Government of Newfoundland and Labrador and Charlene Kippenhuck of the NunatuKavut Community Council for presenting this important webinar. This evening will be split into two presentations, which should take us to just before 8 p.m., followed by questions and answers. First, we'll have Melanie Irvine, who will discuss what climate change impacts will look like. Then Charlene Kippenhuck, who will discuss the NunatuKavut Community Council's work on what the community is doing to build capacity and resilience to mitigate the impacts. So thank you very much. And we can get started with Melanie, if you're ready to go.
All right. I think I just need permission to share my screen. So Carrie, I don't know if you can give me permission to share my screen.
Apologies for the technical difficulties.
All right. Okay. Can people see the screen? All right, so my name is Melanie and I work with the Geological Survey. So my role at the survey is to try to understand the physical environment and how it's changing, especially in light of climate change and sea level rise and how that's impacting communities and infrastructure. Sorry, my computer is, okay. So just as an outline, I'm just going to introduce the talk by showing some slides of some of the different coastal environments which we're working in, which includes the ancestral territory of members of the NCC, some of the coastal risks we're looking at, some of the work we're doing, and I'll just introduce a little bit of the work which we're doing up in southern Labrador with Charlene and others. So when we picture coastal Newfoundland and Labrador, you know, what comes to mind is often this hard rock or bedrock coastline, which compared to other areas of our province is relatively resistant to coastal erosion and other coastal risks. However, many of our communities are built in very low-lying areas with a lot of the key infrastructure running very close to the coast. For instance, we have the community of Placentia on the Avalon, which is surrounded by water, and most of the key infrastructure is built either at or below sea level. So we've been working with communities like Placentia to try to better understand how climate change and sea level rise will impact their area. Here's a shot from southern Labrador. So we also have these pockets of our province, which the sediments, such as this sandy area, make the area very sensitive to change. We also have a lot of low-lying areas with historic infrastructure, such as this graveyard on a spit outside of Terrenceville. Or we have newer housing developments, which have been built very close to eroding bluffs or cliffs. And some of our roads are being compromised by issues related to coastal erosion. And some of our recreational areas have either been closed or such as this cabin out on the Port-au-Port Peninsula has been damaged due to coastal erosion. So at the survey, we look at different types of coastal or environmental change. So part of what we're looking at is sort of that slow, gradual change to the landscape. So this is a image shown of Point Verde on the Avalon Peninsula in 1995. And this next image is the same portion of the coast, but a few years later in 2003. And you can see a lot of sediment has been removed from the base of this cement structure. Here's that same cement structure a couple years later. And when we returned to the area in 2011, the cement structure was at the base of the cliff. So part of our work at the survey is to trying to quantify the rates of coastal change in areas such as these and have a better understanding of why these areas are changing. So what are the causes of erosion? Then this can help us better understand how the area may change in the future. We also look at incidences or areas at risk to sudden change. So this is an example of a landslide that occurred in Daniels Harbor in 2007. And if we look at an air image of Daniels Harbor, you can see various landscape scars, these sort of semicircular scars on the landscape. And this is evidence of past landscapes, or sorry, past landslides. So this area here, due to the nature of the sediment, is very susceptible to landslides. So part of our work is to try to identify what areas in the province are susceptible to landslides. We also look at the impact of storm surges or large storm events along the coast, such as this portion of the coastline in Conception Bay South on the Avalon. And that's the same boulder in the two photos before and after a storm. So when we're trying to understand risk in the coastal environment, we try to incorporate information from different aspects. So part of our work, which I'll talk about in a few slides, is work with drones. We've been using drones to collect information on the physical environment. And this has really transformed how we can collect data. We also bring in other tidbits of the landscape, such as the type of material which comprises the environment. So if a community is built on sand versus clay versus gravel, it will respond very differently to coastal processes. We also look at other characteristics of the physical environment, such as the slope of the beach. Where we can, we try to bring in historic information, either through old photographs or through traditional or local knowledge. And of course, we always try to look to see how the environment will change in the future. And to do this, we've been looking at climate change projections, which were produced by Memorial University, as well as looking at what the sea level will be, how the sea level will be changing. So I'll just talk briefly about sea level change as well as the climate change projections. So when we're talking about sea level change, what we're really talking about is relative sea level change. So how is the level of the water changing compared to the land? So in Newfoundland and Labrador, there's two main factors which play into this, both how the ocean itself is changing and the land motion. So here's just, it's a bit of a busy slide, but again, global sea level rise in the province, it's sort of some of the main factors are an increased input into the ocean from melting of glaciers and the disintegration of ice sheets, as well as a change in the density of the ocean. As the ocean warms, the density changes and it expands, so it increases in volumes. And also in the province, the land itself is either rising or falling due to the impact of the last glaciation. So here's a map showing how local sea level is projected to change by the end of this century. So we can see that areas in Labrador, in particular northern Labrador, a relative sea level change will only be 70 centimeters or less. Compared to the Avalon, we're expected to see a rise of over 100 centimeters. And this variation is due to the fact that in Labrador, or northern Labrador, the land itself is rising, whereas in the Avalon, the land is sinking. So we also are taking into consideration climate change projections. So here we're looking at our work by Dr. Finnis and Joe Gerio from MUN. And so they were able to provide projections for the mid to the late portion of this century. So I won't go into the details of this, but they looked at 18 different climate indices and were able to produce maps for different regions as well as for different seasons. For instance, they looked to see how the mean daily precipitation is projected to change. So by taking in their projections into our understanding of coastal environments, we can have a better understanding of how coastal processes are projected to change and what this will mean for the landscape. So just to summarize some of the environmental changes that we're expected to see in the province, expected to see rising sea levels, an increase in the number of days with substantial precipitation, and this is in particular important for areas that are susceptible to landslides, because a trigger of a landslide is often saturated sediment. An increase in the mean daily precipitation, so this will undoubtedly lead to more erosion, both stronger and more frequent storms, warmer air and water temperatures, and this can impact the track of hurricanes, as well as less sea ice and shore-passed ice. And sea ice and shore-passed ice can act as natural barriers to the coastline. So with a decrease in ice along the shores, and we're expected to see the rates of coastal erosion to increase. So as I mentioned, we're currently using a drone to collect a lot of our data. And here's just, an image of one of our staff members flying the drone. So it's just controlled by an iPad and a little joystick. So the drone will take a series of overlapping air photos, and it will fly over an area. And then when we get back to the office, we can process these photos. And we can produce what we call a point cloud, and I won't get into the details of the data processing, but from here we can produce a range of products such as 3D models that can really help us better understand the environment. So I'll just provide a brief example of some work that we've been doing in Crabs River, which is on the west coast of the island. So here there was a concern with erosion along the top of this bluff here. There's a graveyard and an ATV track which are situated very close to the coast, as well as flooding to the wharf area. And so here's just a 3D model to give you a bit of a visual of what the area looks like. So this was created with the drone data. So we surveyed this area on multiple years So the image on the right-hand side of the screen is a sort of a bird's eye view. So here you have the top of the cliff, the face of the cliff, and the beach area. And the blue line represents the position of the cliff top in 2013. And the red line is the position of the cliff top in 2017. And then we were able to determine rates of coastal erosion. So on average, the stretch of the coastline is eroding just over 0.5 meter a year, but some areas are eroding at 135 centimeters a year. So it's moving quite quickly. And if we want to look to see what the coastline may look like in the future, if we assume that erosion rates will not decrease, and we don't, there's no indication that erosion will decrease. If we use current rates of erosion, this is where the cliff top will be in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years, and 50 years. So in 50 years, it's shown outside of this slide, but there's a graveyard up here, which will be compromised in 25 to 50 years. We can also look to see how much sediment is moving off the cliff face. So for this, in 1 year, for this portion of the cliff top, the equivalent of 405 school bus loads of sediment was removed from the cliff face. So we know that this is an actively eroding cliff face. And we also know that this sediment is going somewhere, so it's likely feeding a beach system at downdrift. We can also create flood risk models. So these are very basic, but we can flood an area. This is the area of the wharf to a 1 meter, 2 meter, and 3 meter rise in water height. So here, this could, for this area, the sea level is projected to rise 1 meter. So if we show what the area will look like with sea level rise plus sea level rise and a storm surge of 1 or 2 meters, we can see which infrastructure would be underwater. So we've been working with the NCC as well as the World Wildlife Fund and some other groups to look at coastal change in southern Labrador. So this is part of a coastal restoration project, which is being led by the World Wildlife Foundation. And they've been able to pull together different groups to do this work. As for part of this work, the goal is to identify data gaps on areas of coastal habitat for important species, such as capelin or other fish. And through this work, we've been able to monitor different nearshore environments. So we would have gone up there this summer, but COVID obviously has prevented that, at least from the survey, from going out to do some monitoring. So here are some different locations that we've set up with the NCC to monitor for coastal change. So here's just a photograph of 4 of the sites which we're looking at. So they're mainly, they're all beach sites, and there are a lot of sandy beaches that are often very low lying. So they can be very susceptible to coastal change and to coastal flooding. One area which we've been surveying with the NCC, which we do have a bit more data for, is the community of Forto. And here's just a video we took from last summer. So here's just 3 different images of the community of Forto. And we haven't been able to analyze the data we collected last summer because well, we haven't been able to be in the office for a few months where the processing software is. But based on data which we had previously collected in 2012 and 2014, the average rate of erosion of the coastline in Forto is around 54 centimeters a year. But some portions of this coastline are eroding at 150 centimeters a year. And as I mentioned, currently the current data is being processed. But what's great with this project is Charlene and her colleagues are able to go out on themselves. They've purchased a drone and survey equipment, so they're able to go out themselves to collect the data and send it to us for analysis. So that's the end of my talk. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Melanie, for that. That was great. It was very incredible, some of those numbers there. So I'll leave it to Charlene Gippenhuck to do your presentation, please.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just going to try and share my screen as well. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Hi, I'm Charlene Kipanook. I'm the Natural Resources Manager. I work in the Environment Natural Resources Department for NunatuKavut Community Council. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about some of our climate change monitoring and some of our work that we've been doing towards that. I'm just going to talk a little bit about who we are, what we've heard from our communities, what we're currently doing, what we hope to plan on doing in future. So NunatuKavut means our ancient land, and it is the territory of the Inuit of NunatuKavut who reside primarily in southern and central Labrador. And this is just a map of our of some of our communities. I'm actually from this little community right here in Charlottetown, and we used to go out. My dad was a fisherman, and if you could see, there's Pinson's Arm. There's a little island there called Square Islands, and that's where we used to fish in the summertime. So we have about 3,500 resident members inside this territory. We have about 2,000 non-resident members. But when we examine our demographics, we know there's probably likely around 6,000 members that we have. And we are people whose identity is shaped by the land, the sea, and the ice. As much as in the north, NunatuKavut has experienced a lot of impacts of our climate change firsthand. We have local conditions and ecosystems that are changing, which affect our community health, our safety, and culture. We've had ice bridges that connect isolated communities such as Black Tickle, Norman's Bay, and they're cut off from the mainland. We have changes to some of our fish species. Last few years we've had striped bass in our waters, and we're not sure if they're actually staying and breeding here, which is a major concern for us because they eat a lot of our capelin and our salmon, which are very important to us. And then we also have some other species such as cormorants who are slowly moving north and are taking over certain small islands and pushing our eider ducks off the islands and eating a lot of ducks' eggs. Our communities have been telling us there's more wind, we're having bigger storms, and it impacts a lot of our infrastructure and our livelihoods. Just for instance, in the community I was just telling you about in Square Islands, we've had wharves and stages that have been there for numerous years that have now been taken away with the ice and falling down. My dad actually built a brand new wharf and bolted it to the bedrock, and that has been, and within one season, that was completely gone. So we had a lot of concerns about food security, sea level rising, coastal erosion, and in particular about our archaeology sites. A lot of our sites have not been documented, so we don't even know what we are losing. And just not being able to get out on the land like we used to, that has an effect on our members as well, or their mentality. And our members have been telling us there's so much unpredictable about our ice and our snow. And they still, some of our members still don't quite understand climate change, so they want more education, and they want to focus on our elders and our youth. And just a few other particular things that they suggested was community gardens, different energy sources, and food security issues, things like that. So that's why NCC, a lot of the work that NCC has been doing is community driven. It's a research approach, and it's very important to us that our communities are involved in any of the research that that's going on within our territory, because we do have a deep and enduring relationship with the natural environment around us. And we want to make sure that the research is focusing on our community needs and priorities. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about a few of our initiatives. It's being led by some of our other departments within NCC, not only environment and natural resources. So we do a lot of partnering with our other departments. One of the initiatives is our sustainability initiative. This is being led by our director of research. It's her doctoral research. And this is all based, strength-based decision-making and planning. So it includes like community asset mapping, community engagement, and visioning exercises. One of the things that they have done, if you can see in the picture there, was taken of a little girl in black tickle during an event where they were asked what they love about their community. And so she likes berry picking, which is a big deal for us as well. Another thing, we've have a lot of renewable energy initiatives, and it's led with by NCC with some of our partners. We had 3 pilot communities, now has been expanded into 6 other communities across our territory. The research has revealed that communities are aware that there are impacts for climate change and the impacts to their daily lives. But some of our communities still face immediate and urgent needs like home heating and water security, such as in black tickle. Some of our other things that we've done was including engaging our youth into this Nature Youth Council. It's an innovative action team of understanding renewable energy. So we're trying to build capacity within our communities for our youth, and hopefully they'll come back and work for NCC in the future. Another main project is our coastal restoration planning that we have with WWF. It has 3 main goals, and one is community consultations to identify the values and threats and opportunities and best practices for sustainable coastal restoration in Nunatukovut, which includes our capelin spawning habitats and other coastal habitat that's important to Arctic char and our salmon, that it's a big issue. We know that our capelin populations have been gone down. We've heard from lots of our members right across the coast saying that there's no capelin, they're not coming in the shore to spawn anymore, that type of scenario. And then the second thing that the coastal restoration is doing is some site surveying. So they're doing some electrofishing surveys to assess the baseline numbers for Atlantic salmon and Arctic char. And Melanie has already mentioned monitoring coastal erosion with some aerial drone surveys that we've been doing as well. So we usually do that in August. One of the other main projects that we have on the go in our territory is the Driving Climate Knowledge Forward. It's a project by and for NunatuKavut. It's a community-based climate monitoring program. So we have 7 key indicators that we try to monitor, and we have 3 tracks. So our youth direct ice and monitoring track, we have youth engaged in a few of our communities to go out and actually measure the ice and measure the temperatures and that type of stuff, take videos and pictures. So they're out there monitoring that monthly. And then our out on the land track is interviewing adults who go out on the land to hunt and fish, trap and harvest berries and medicinal plants and other plants. And the 3rd track is our elder climate knowledge track. So interviewing our elders to get their observation, their stories and recollections of changes that they witnessed over the years. And we were planning on this spring actually to have a few more focus groups, but unfortunately due to COVID-19, we weren't able to do some of that work. So that's been a little bit delayed for us, which is unfortunate, because a lot of our knowledge hasn't been written down, and that's what we need. We need to record our information so then we know how best to respond to the changes. So some of the things that we are planning on doing, we have a climate change strategy that we've been working on. We are partnering with our research department. We just, last March before COVID-19 hit, we had a research conference, and we had lots of input from our communities wanting more direction on what research we should be doing in our communities. Of course, it was education, food security of country foods, the changing ice conditions, archaeology sites. So those were some of the concerns and topics that our members are wanting to incorporate within our research. And we are also trying to build more capacity that is both financial and bodies of people to actually go out and do some of this work. We need to build on our knowledge. Like I stated earlier, we have we need to document. We have a lot of knowledge in our communities. Unfortunately, we don't have it all documented, and that's what we need to focus on, documenting that so we can figure out what is best to do. And one of the other things that is on our radar is to do some more sea ice monitoring, such as this smart ice that we've been investigating, just in particular with our black tickle community. They have no fuel within the community, so they actually have to travel along the sea ice during the winter to actually get fuel to heat their homes and to gas up their skidoos to actually be able to go get firewood and that kind of stuff. And it's the same with our small community of Norman's Bay. They actually have to come to Charlottetown to actually get their mail, to go to the grocery store. So we have a few different scenarios within our communities. So yeah, that's all I had. This is just my information. If you need to have any other questions, or you can just email me as well. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much to both of you, Charlene and Melanie. It's quite an incredible presentation side by side like that. It's it's seeing those numbers like, 54 to 150 centimeters a year of the erosion, and just it's just incredible. It's a very existential problem to see the kind of land being eroded away like that. And yeah, it's very surprising. But yeah, that's what we're dealing with. And thank you once again. So we'll start with the question and answer period. So for those that are in the Zoom meeting, if you would like to participate in that, you're welcome to hold up your hand in the participant group chat, or in the participant screen. There's an option for you to raise your hand, and then we'll get to you. And then there's also an option to put in your questions in the chat. So we will start. Let's go with this. So I have a question here. I'm not sure from who, but Nicholas, I believe it's from Nicholas. How would your life change 25 years down the line based on current changes that you noticed along the coast with respect to livelihood / everyday life? And I imagine that's for Charlene.
Well, a lot of our, I think along the coastline, that we'd have a lot more wind, so we can't get out on the land to get our country foods. I can see another thing that has been happening across the north is they call it the greening of the north. That is also happening here in Labrador. We are getting a lot of alders for our trappers that are going in. They're noticing there's more alders around, and there's just the changing of the species composition within Labrador. So that's having an impact on what food we are harvesting. So if the otter ducks go down, like we do depend on ducks and fish and our berries. So another thing that has also been happening, the research around Cartwright, Black Tickle area, there's a lot of nice bake apple areas, and there's actually permafrost mounds, and they say that the best berries are on these permafrost mounds, and that's melting, so that's having an impact on where the berries are growing and where we're getting our berries. And as Melanie showed in some of her pictures as well, pretty much all of our roads are alongside the beach, and people still go out to the outport communities like Square Islands, Fish Ships Harbor, George's Cove, and to go fishing to get their food for the winter. So if their stages is falling down or being taken away by ice, there's going to be an impact of how you land ashore, that type of stuff. Like my house at Square Islands is pretty much in the beach. So if we get too much ice, too much storm surge, that's a potential that we could lose our house. And that's a significant impact for people.
Thank you very much for that. The next question is from Victoria Neville. What are towns doing to plan coastal infrastructure that is climate resilient? Who are the movers and shakers?
I think it's more NunatuKavut is actually trying to drive that change. The NCC is trying to drive that and get that climate change awareness out into communities. And one of the things I have that will be in our climate change strategy is to look at our infrastructure and how we would help our communities respond and make sure that our buildings are climate resilient. We have been talking about doing some type of energy initiatives where pretty kitty, sorry, got distracted. But and a lot of any of our new buildings that we have been contemplating, we're hoping will be have some aspect of solar, that type of stuff. So I think NCC is our, hopefully our the movers and shakers, as Victoria had stated. So
Thank you. Melanie, did you have anything to add to that by any chance?
No, I think Charlene said it very well. Yeah, I think it's often sort of the community-driven change is what's really, going to drive change in the long term.
Thank you. I have a question myself, and maybe for both of you from different perspectives, and coming from representing sort of like an academics as like organizers and activists and whatnot, and here at the university and in the community as well. What are things that we can do here in town, but in other places, but mostly with all our kind of energy towards kind of solving this climate crisis, and recognizing that Labrador, these areas are just getting hit hard, and what did you see people from here at the university, for instance, could do to help out with solving these sort of problems?
I think some of the what could help us, it is some of the capacity, so helping us figure out to be able to teach our communities. So if we can have some assistance in that, some education pieces, I mean, and even what's the word, like internships where we can have some of our own students being able to come in and work with some research projects within their hometowns and lead that type of research. Where we are always trying to encourage our youth to volunteer with us and to expand and go to university and then be able to come back and actually help our communities and respond to some of these research. And I've also said before that we don't know what we don't know. So just being able to be a partner with us, and some of our ethics, we have an ethics board as well. So if there are research topics that you are interested in, instead of going ahead and writing the proposal and then coming to us for opinions and that type of stuff, or partners, if you could talk to us first, and then we can develop the proposal together, and then we can direct what would be most appropriate for our communities. Just for, as I said earlier, some communities are in that zone where they are ready to go ahead and do more research on climate change and help do some more community resilience planning. Whereas then there are other communities that aren't even thinking, they know it's an issue, but that's way down on the priority list for that. So if we can also get help with some of the food security issues and the heat security issues, or that type of stuff as well. So just knowing that the different dynamics across our territory.
Thank you for that. Melanie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so just sort of, yeah, to echo a lot of what Charlene says, but what we're seeing, both, not so much working with the NCC, but some of the other communities across the province, is just, sort of the need to assist with capacity building, whether or not they don't have the equipment to do certain monitoring, or just some of the technical expertise to process some of the data. I think by sort of bridging the two groups, they often, the communities have a very good understanding of changes in their environment, but if they can sort of work with MUN or other groups to sort of help quantify some of the change, or help spread the word about their change, I think it can it can work really well together. So whether or not it's students doing projects or other things like that, I think it can, by helping to build capacity.
Excellent. Thank you very much for those answers. That's fantastic. Our next question is from Shalindra. What is the government doing for the communities more at risk from coastal erosion, if any? I suppose that's for both of you. And just to add to that, not just the Newfoundland Labrador government, but we might as well talk about if the federal government is doing something about these sort of issues.
I mean, so I guess I can sort of speak to what the province is doing or trying to do. At natural resources and at some other departments, a lot of it is, assisting communities with data collection, such as what we're doing with the coastal monitoring program, or what some other groups have been doing with river flood mapping. So try to have a better understanding of the impacts of climate change on the communities, as well as trying to build tools and different resources that could be used by communities, and holding workshops or other networking events. So at least at the survey, if there is an area at risk, if a community approaches the survey, we can assist with monitoring and with data collection and with data analysis.
And Charlene?
For us, we have got some funding from the federal government to do some climate change work. That's where we got our funding for our community-based climate monitoring program. We did have some other funding to get ready for some climate change and hiring a climate change coordinator. And like, we have partnered with different departments. In all of our research, climate change has been also a topic. When we talk about, we had funding for species at risk, climate change is also one of the main issues for species at risk. So we do have good partnerships with our federal and provincial governments, so that they're there to assist us.
Thank you. I suppose, I would just follow up with that. Is there like, a typical, like an idea of the sort of costs that might be involved as far as the sort of, like just for example, like the infrastructure in the port, the arbors and whatnot, as far as, in the next 10 years or whatnot, or has that been looked into, like the sort of, what these, your community as well as the government might be looking at in the future? Like that sort of breakdown, does that exist out there?
We haven't did anything so much for our communities as of yet, but I'm sure that's coming in the future.
Mm-hmm. We have a hand up.
Hi, this is Hassan from MUN Students Union. I have a question. It has been discussed a lot about the long-term solutions that involve students. Sorry, that involve students of raising awareness, talking about the issues, making sure everyone knows how important it is on the long term. But I was wondering, what do you think the challenges are for the short-term policies that can be implemented right away, but are not in Newfoundland and Labrador to the environmental policies that can be implemented, or for example, from the top of my head, regarding the windmills and many other policies that can be implemented but are not to fight climate change. What challenges there are, and how do you think students can work on that on the short term?
I'll let Charlene go ahead if you'd like to.
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. So you're asking what students can do to help move policy?
First, it's a two-part question. The first part is, what are the challenges that prevent short-term policies that can be implemented now in order to fight climate change in Newfoundland and Labrador? And so what are these challenges, and what do you think students can do regarding these challenges?
I think I need to think about that one a little bit more. Well, I think we need to get more baseline data, especially for Labrador, and we need to work on for NCC. We want to do our climate change strategy, and I think that would help us identify which priorities that we need to focus on, which then in turn can help guide some of our research. And I think just being involved and being aware, getting out there and communicating with people, and bringing climate awareness to Newfoundland, Labrador, to the world, and just being able to if we had more of our students who have lived through grew up in small town Labrador, they can be they're better able to explain the impacts that climate change has on our communities and on our mentality and on our culture. I think that kind of answers the question.
We got a thumbs up.
Yes.
Melanie, would you like to add to that as well?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have a background in policy, but from what I see from more science perspective, is definitely disconnect between communities, policy, and science and data. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know how you solve it, and you know, that's something that's very challenging to do. But I think stuff like this, or working in partnerships, and I think one of the challenging things in terms of the science behind climate change is, you know, climate change is naturally uncertainties in a lot of the numbers and the projections, and so, you know, sometimes if people have to make decisions and you're given there's so much built-in uncertainty, which is not a reason not to make a decision, but it can be, I think it can add to a already challenging topic. I don't know if that really answers your question, but.
More thumbs up. We got some more questions. Very good discussion we got going on here. Are there other comparable studies or initiatives you've been able to look into federally or globally, which have seemed successful or provided insights into what could or should happen? I'll let Melanie start this time.
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, in terms from a coastal erosion, coastal hazard perspective, other provinces and territories are conducting somewhat similar similar studies. Like in Nova Scotia, they're looking at coastal erosion and coastal flooding, especially in some of their dikeland areas. So I think we can definitely learn from those examples and learn from their studies. But there's always the unique challenge too, which, you know, every province and territory and location is different and has different challenges and different issues. So I think it's, you know, trying to juggle both of those. But yeah, no, there is definitely more traction, I think, in terms of trying to understand, you know, how our environments will be impacted by climate change.
Yeah, we've looked at a few different initiatives. I think I mentioned it earlier, the smart ice monitoring that's happening across the north, and it seems to work really well. The equipment is very expensive, which is why we need more funding to help with getting some of that equipment. We do look to our neighbors in the north, a little bit further north, and they have some really good programs in place. We also have our guardians in place that are on the ground and can see firsthand the changes, and are involved with a lot of our research as field techs and things like that. And that's kind of similar across the north. So there has been some great success stories for sure.
Thank you for that. And we have the next question from Shalanandra. Would the provincial or federal government provide any sort of compensation if communities are forced to move due to coastal erosion?
So again, my background isn't in policy, but in certain instances, like in the Daniels Harbor landslide, the homeowners were compensated and their houses were moved or rebuilt in more stable terrain. And I know in another example in Trout River, there was a couple of houses which were, it wasn't due to coastal erosion, it was due to a landslide, but people were compensated. But if there is erosion on a smaller scale on private property, it is up to the landowner to pay for the costs. So there's not, to the best of my knowledge, it's pretty rare that there is a lot of compensation given to private homeowners.
And Charlene, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't have anything to add. I think Melanie answered it as best as I could as well.
Mm-hmm. I guess like my own commentary on that, it's, how can you really ever compensate anything for a community being taken away from you? It's pretty devastating in so many different ways, and just like one of probably the most terrifying I find impacts of climate change, the fact that it will be sweeping away communities in the decades to come or currently, and it's just such a horrifying thought. So our next question is, how bad is the non-biodegradable waste pollution problem on land and sea in the province? A little tangential, but maybe has some effects with how our coasts are looking.
It's bad. Yeah, like we've been finding there, we have one of our projects that we're doing, I think, in around Gilbert's Bay Marine Protected Area and along the coast is working with WWF again on some ghost gear, and so that non-biodegradable impact on killing our other species, and that impact. So we are hoping to lead a little bit more of that and trying to get rid of some of that ghost gear. Yeah, there's yeah, it has a lot of impact on our land and our water, and of course then that impacts us and access to our country foods.
Yeah, so I can add too, yeah, throughout the province when we're on a beach that, you know, would naturally have deposition of sediment, you're also seeing a lot of plastic garbage accumulating on these beaches, and it's huge, you know, the amount of trash which you can see, and yeah, it's often left up to the community or the local residents to clean up, which is, you know, can be very challenging.
Yeah, I believe last year during Oceans Day, we had a couple of Oceans Day cleanups in a couple of our communities, and I believe they, I think it was in Cartwright, they had, I'm not sure how many truckloads of garbage that they picked up along the beach, and it was astronomical. Actually, I couldn't believe how much garbage we actually picked up. And unfortunately, due to COVID again, we didn't get to do a lot of our beach cleanups this year. We had 5 scheduled in 5 different communities along the coast. But hopefully we can do that a little bit later. We'll do our beach cleanups later in the year.
Thank you for that. You know, I was just thinking about that and kind of had a sort of a question come with just the idea, you know, with you know, with the ghost nets and whatnot coming, but also like, you know, what we might not think about is how the Arctic is opening up and shipping routes might be going through, and they'll be coming along the Labrador coast through the eastern seaboard from the States and whatnot, more vessels. And as well as I'm curious, like with the industrial fishers, but I suppose with that recent oil spill, you know, when discussing about the coastal impacts of climate change, has there been much discussions of the way that this kind of industry around the Arctic, I suppose, is going to be sort of evolving, especially with more marine traffic? Is that on the radar right now? Within, you know, the work that you do, Melanie, or the communities of Labrador there, Charlene?
Yeah, so it is a little bit out of the scope of my work, but there has been other, slightly unrelated, other work which has been done to see, you know, if there was an oil spill along portions of the coast and on the island or up in Labrador, where would the oil go? Yeah, sort of by looking at different characteristics of beaches in the ocean system. So there has been a report or a study done by Norm Caddo on that to see where pollution could end up if there was a spill.
Yeah, that's been a major concern for a lot of our fishers. Because a lot of our members are fishermen, so the impact on our marine environment is a huge issue for us. And like we live off the land, so any impact into the environment impacts us as well. And one of the first things that people do bring up is oil spills. We have been working with the Canadian Coast Guard to provide training to some of our staff on oil spillage. We are working towards getting oil spill kits within our communities. So we are, it has been talked about, and we have it is on our radar. And yeah, it's being led by our oceans and aquatic specialist. So he's been heavily involved in all that oceans management work with with the Canadian Coast Guard.
Excellent, thank you. From Victoria Novell, Melanie, do you find that communities are generally aware in Newfoundland of the risk associated with coastal change? What needs to be done to ensure safety?
So I find often the communities, and it is changing, are not necessarily aware. And I think part of this is just due to competing priorities in some of these, especially some of the more smaller communities. You know, the town plan, well, there isn't definitely a lack of town planners in the province who are working in these communities. And some of the smaller communities, there's just, you know, the town clerk might be in charge of a huge array of responsibilities. So you know, piling on the impacts of coastal erosion and coastal flooding in their communities. You know, they've got a lot on their plate. But I think, you know, it's starting to change. And I think one of the, you know, but by better trying to bridge, you know, the science and the communities, as well as engineers and planners, because engineers can have a huge role, you know, in ensuring the safety of infrastructure and certain parts of a community. So I think the engineers recently have been really, at least from my perspective, changing their practices to incorporate more climate change scenarios into their planning and design. So I think that will help hopefully in the future.
And Charlene, would you like to add to that?
I agree with Melanie that a lot of our smaller communities doesn't necessarily know a lot about it, but they are aware. But it is more, like she said, about community planners and things like that. We have a town clerk who's pretty much a generalist and not an expert in all these things, and are responsible for numerous things in the community, pretty much everything. They do anything from planning Canada Day activities to planning, taking meeting minutes for the community council. So they, yeah, a lot of our communities haven't really thought about doing a lot of the community mapping, that type of information. And I'm hoping that with NCC's help, and if we can get some more funding, that we can actually assist in some of that and work with the government and other community planners to gather that information.
And I think I'll just add too, I think, you know, when I said the communities aren't aware, they probably are aware, but sometimes the language which is being used to discuss the same topic is very different. So I think part of it too, coming from the more academic or government or science side of things, is making sure that our language is appropriate. Because I think often, you know, there's a bit of barrier there that, you know, the community members, you know, are aware of changes in the climate, but just the language that we use and the way we present our data or present ourselves is not appropriate, you know, for the community setting.
Thank you. We have a question from Natasha Hart. What is a possible solution to stop the movements of plastic into our oceans? We are still a fishing island. We know that microplastics can be in the fish we eat. So out of the context of climate change, but I'm interested, maybe Charlene, if you have any sort of ideas about the plastics around that area.
I know that our oceans and aquatic specialist has been working, Stan Oliver has been working with a professor at MUN. I can't remember her name right now. She has a microplastics research project on the go, and we have been a partner in that research. How we clean up plastic within our oceans, we do need to create more awareness and work with, like we have a lot of our fishing. One of the things that have come up, a lot of our commercial fishers, when they pick up their bait and stuff, it's all wrapped in plastic in a box. So of course, not all the plastic gets brought back. It happens. So, but how to work with our fishermen and work with our communities to lessen the plastic, I think that's the way to go. More education, awareness for sure.
Yeah, Natasha added, my students cleaned the beaches in the past 2 weeks and were appalled by what they collected. And also, this may be beyond the scope of this conversation, but is the Newfoundland government responsibility in cleaning up oil spills, and will they reach out beyond our jurisdiction to ensure that the waters beyond our waters are cleaned? I'm not sure if you either have any sort of insight in that area.
Yeah, that's beyond my knowledge base.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure on that either.
Well, it looks like that's the queue of questions. You know, before we sign off, it was a pretty good discussion. Is there anything more that you'd like to add, Charlene or Melanie?
No, I do appreciate being asked to come on and share our story, and just letting people know the impact that climate change has on our members and our people and our culture. Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just sort of echo a bit of what Charlene said, and it's nice to be able to talk about our work, and you know, we're always up for collaborations. Yeah, so if anyone who's listening, you know, can see a way that we can partner and work together, I think that's definitely one of the better ways forward.
Awesome. Yes, and thank you so much, the both of you. This has been incredible, and it's been a great start to the series that we're starting with the coalition here. And this is a big part of climate change, dealing with this massive challenge, this this big monster we're dealing with, is just like having constant conversations and getting more people involved and confronting these challenges, and finding ways to fix these issues and building resilience, and a lot of it it's in the communities. And so it's great to hear from you, Charlene, and a lot of it's with the sort of evidence, and so it's great to hear from you, Melanie, about how things are, what the government in Newfoundland is doing. And I think before I sign off, for all our viewers, we'll be doing another webinar in 2 weeks with the kind of fish food in action, and you'll get more details about that soon. And that will be on our website, www.muncac.ca. Otherwise, you can kind of go through our Facebook or Twitter. And that should be it. Thank you so much once again, and good night to everybody.
Thanks.
Good night and thank you. Ciao.